Alrighty, guys. I'm Alex Rangel. We got Jerrod Hardy here and Ali. We're about to start a new podcast. We don't have quite a name for it. If you guys have something in mind, let us know. But give it a short little bit about myself. I'm Alex Rangel from Texas. Moved to Fort Collins not too long ago. And then joined this awesome gym called Trials MMA. And from here, I met these two cool gentlemen. And the rest is kind of history. Trying to do better here. Have my own podcast, the Dream Man podcast, and trying to compete here later on, still training. But we're here to kind of spread the vulnerability, spread our own thoughts and spread good vibes. And so here we go. We'll let Jerrod kind of take over from here.
Hey, thanks for listening. I'm Jerrod Hardy. Let's see here, man. I recently retired from police work after 21 years, and I just love sharing, man. I love delivering stories that call people to action in their own lives and encourage thought and development, making those around us better. So I'm excited for this podcast. And really, when I think about this, that's what we're doing. We're three average guys that just happen to have a common goal of chasing martial arts and jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts. And through that, we humble ourselves and we're open to learning from others. And we realize there's a lot more in the world to learn and to share once we give and receive. So that's the intent of this podcast, is just to share our real life experiences and encourage you to do the same and realize that we're all responsible for where we want to get in life.
Agreed.
Yeah, amen to that. Hello, everybody. My name is Ali Abuzalam. My work title is CEO and co-founder of B-Nails, the best vaporizer company on the planet. Shameless plug there. And yeah, the dynamic between us three is really interesting. We all met at Trials MMA. Jerrod is actually our coach, our kickboxing coach, and I disagree with him. I don't think that we are three average people, and that's kind of the point of this podcast, is to realize that everybody is unique and individual, and that everybody is above average. So that's a mentality that Jerrod really instills in a lot of his students, and it's cool to have this kind of unique dynamic. And again, we don't really have a name for this podcast. It's day one, but Alex has been running his own podcast, and with a little guidance from him, I think that we're going to get something going here. And the general purpose is to just empower people to take action in their lives based on real stuff that we're experiencing. Sure. So we're trying to get people going by being vulnerable. So here we go.
Here we go, guys. Yeah, that's a Journey Man podcast, just so you guys know.
So you may get a lot of plugs, because we all have businesses, and that's kind of one of the cool things is we're all actively pursuing bigger dreams than what we started out with. Now, through this podcast, you'll hear different stories. We'll share different parts of our lives, but none of what we're doing right now is what we set out to do. We all went to school for different things. We all had different aspects of life, but what brought us here is the true calling, that there's more to give in the world, and that it's nobody else's job but ours to put positivity back in people's lives, to share real world ups and downs, to encourage people to get moving on their lives. So I'm excited here, man. There's a lot of experience in this room. There's some generational stuff. Maybe we'll get this up on video, and you can see like one of us is older than the other two, but I'm not going to tell you who that is for a while. And man, let's have some fun with this, and I hope you guys listeners feel moved to take some actions in your lives and give us feedback. Let us know where we're going to help out. So first week, we thought we'd just open up with vulnerability. And I like this topic because what you're seeing right now is us modeling vulnerability, right? We're taking a risk that people are going to want to listen to this podcast, that the three of us can get along, that the three of us have same visions and goals. But if I stay in my box and I don't share this, I miss out on the relationship with these two. I miss out on a relationship with you guys. So we're going to kick off this week by talking about vulnerability, because I think once you realize it's okay to be vulnerable, life looks different to you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's that like red colored lens on your life, When you have that lens, everything looks bad, and then you kind of freak out and you can't think clearly. But all it is, once you realize it's just about being vulnerable and understanding what being vulnerable means and what it is to you, it's like taking that rose-colored lens off, and you're able to see the world as it really is instead of that red lens on top of it. So let's start off with that, man. What does vulnerability mean to you?
To me, vulnerability is power, right? And I think that's kind of an oxymoron, right? Like people look at vulnerability and like, oh, you're kind of weak, you're being a victim of things. And I see it the opposite. It means you're real. And I'm not holding back to the circumstances that weren't in my control, the things in life that just threw at me, but I'm actually taking power. So it's okay to say, hey, this bothered me, this hurt me, I'm not feeling great here in my life. And by doing that and allowing that process to come out, I'm actually taking some power back to myself. I'm not just the result of what everything else that happens to me. I'm the result of what I give back and what I accept and how I process it.
I agree. While you were saying that, I pulled up the Google definition just because I like to compare that. And Google says that vulnerability is the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. And I mean, that's why Google's Google, right?
Right. That's a great definition.
That's a fantastic definition, and that's very similar to how I look at it. I look at vulnerability as like going into something that's uncomfortable, whether that's having that tough conversation with someone or getting in the cage, knowing that someone's going to be trying to rip your head off, tap you out, or telling a loved one something that they need to hear but may not like to hear. So for me, the practice of vulnerability is really fun, and it's gotten a lot easier because when I feel those emotions arising of like, man, I don't want to do this or I don't want to talk about that, I can quickly identify that as a growth opportunity. Like Jerrod was saying, like vulnerability is power. As soon as you move into that resistance, like after you push through that resistance, you feel good. You feel it's like working out, the resistance training. Like you feel those endorphins after you work out, but it's hard to get out of bed and get in the gym. Just like it might be hard to, go to training every day in order to get in the cage and so on and so forth. So that's what it is for me.
And I think you bring up something interesting there is it's easy for us to put external vulnerability, right? Like it's easy for me to look at you guys and go, hey, you need to be more aware, be vulnerable here. Like I can see this is weighing on you. It's harder to be vulnerable for yourself, to be self-accountable, to be vulnerable, right? And I think that's truly, there's two different kinds. There's the people that walk around and point out all the vulnerabilities other people should be doing. And then there's the people that realize, like, wait a second, in order for you to get vulnerable, I've got to be vulnerable. Right? I think too many times we try to just diagnose the other people's and really hide from ourselves. And I know I was guilty of that for a lot of years in life.
You know what I think that is, though? Like, if we're kind of diving into that. Because I know I catch myself doing it, too. Whenever you see people doing things and they kind of bug you, they rub you the wrong way. I know the thing that they're doing is actually something you're worried about yourself. So I think the people who do that are aware of their vulnerabilities, but they're not. I don't know if they're not. There's something about it that they can't call themselves out on it. So they subconsciously point out on everybody else. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what I've noticed. But vulnerability, what's it mean to me? It means several different things to me. When I'm vulnerable, it's usually because I'm comfortable with myself, or there's something that needs to be addressed that I'm not addressing. Either, because it depends on the situation, really. If it's an interaction with somebody, I'm vulnerable because I was either not prepared, or I'm not confident enough, or I'm worried about what they think. So there's a lot of different factors. For me, it's a teacher. I see vulnerability as an eye opener. It used to be hard, like you said. People would just they pointed out on other people, but after kind of realizing what it is, for me, it's like I said, it's a teacher. So it calls out something I need to work on, and then it's also it addresses to me who I am comfortable with. Who I feel safe actually being vulnerable to. Because there's two different types of things. There's being vulnerable where you're kind of you're expressing something, emotionally. You're kind of expressing yourself, putting yourself out there. And then there's also vulnerability where you didn't put yourself in that situation, where you just kind of ended up in that situation, right? And so
I don't know. I don't understand really like how you end up in a situation of vulnerability. I think that you have to. Well, I guess what do you mean by that?
Like you happen to come across a situation, say you're with a stranger or something, and they bring up something that you weren't really ready for, or you're with a coworker and they bring up something you weren't really ready for, or something else, I guess something that you weren't expecting, and so it puts you in a weird spot, and maybe that's just part of my self growth, like that. Having to face things in myself too, to just be transparent, have integrity and stuff like that. So maybe that's part of what's coming out for me, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I can see where you unintentionally end up being vulnerable, and that's usually a result of a lot of things piling up on you, right? And then you get to like a breaking point or a low point, and you go to that AA meeting for the first time, but it wasn't the first time you thought you should have been there. Maybe you got a DUI, maybe you crashed a car, maybe you had a close call with death, right? So you were kind of forced into vulnerability. Now, I think there's other times that you become vulnerable through nature, right? One of the best ways to be vulnerable, have a kid. And then realize like how fragile life is. You didn't do anything to be vulnerable, but life gave you this, and you're like, oh my gosh, everything I do impacts it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But I think what we miss is as we progress in life, we put up walls to vulnerability because we got away with certain things, or we did okay, so we don't have to look at that anymore. And
That's a great analogy.
What truly changes is the people are like, I'm tired of living in this box.
Yeah.
How do I get more out of this life? I have my 9 to 5. I come, I do this, right? Part of it is being vulnerable. I don't know everything. Let me learn a new skill. Yeah. I don't have the friends in my life I want. Let me find new relationships. Right? Like we think of vulnerability as physical vulnerability. Well, I'm not saying don't be safe in life. Like I'm not going to go into dangerous situations mentally checked out. What I'm saying is when you're vulnerable to the people around you, vulnerable to what you learn and what you don't know already, and the experiences you want to have and the people you want to learn from and give to me, that's true vulnerability.
Yeah, that's a good point. And smart vulnerability.
Yeah.
And now that we're getting more into it, it's interesting how it is hard to really have just a concrete definition.
Right, it's a really abstract thing.
Vulnerability is an abstract thing, but I really like the wall definition that you said, Jerrod, because it's something easy to imagine, to where I think vulnerability is choosing to lower those walls,
for sure,
right? Because then you can get hit, you can get, you're out there. And back to your point, Alex, I think that you can also, even if you're being vulnerable, that you can be successful and confident still. Being vulnerable doesn't necessarily mean like that you are going to get hurt or that you are going to like experience anything bad. But it does mean that you're like putting down the walls and like, what's up? So I think that vulnerability, you can choose to do that and still, be a high achieving badass person. And it doesn't, vulnerability doesn't necessarily relate to weakness. And I think that a lot of people, and especially me in the past, have kind of related like vulnerable and weakness in a way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it had a very negative connotation, right? You think about the places most of the time you would hear, hey, you need to be more vulnerable. It was like, for a lot of men, it's an intimate relationship with their lady, right? Hey, you need to be more vulnerable, put your wall. Well, why is that, man? Because we're animals, right? And the first thing an animal thinks of is safety all the time, right? It's what our brain's wired to do. Think of safety first. So saying I don't have all the answers reduces my safety net. Saying I don't know everything about everything reduces my ego, reduces my safety net. Admitting that something you did hurt me reduces my net. Right? And it takes courage to do that. But we've got this whole thing flipped where I'm strong when nothing bothers me. I'm strong when people can die around me and it's not a big deal. I'm strong when in my head I have doubts and negativity and anger and thoughts of hurting myself. But I don't tell you I'm strong. Well, no, fucker, you're not strong. Guess what? You're weak.
Those are those walls you're talking about.
Right, it is. And we put ourselves, and that's why when you look around the world, our economy is great. We live in one of the best places in the country. But yet we also have one of the highest suicide rates. Why is that, man? To me, and I'm simple, guys, I'm telling you right now, I'm simple in life, it's because we don't talk about shit we should be talking about. We don't admit that I'm bothered by something. We don't give to others and share, oh man, Alex has been through this. I can learn from him. I don't have to do this on my own.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? Let's call out what it is. The toughest people in our society are the most likely to take their lives. Police officers. firefighters, soldiers, right? Like I think I'll probably get the number wrong, but I think it's like 22 veterans kill themselves a day.
Wow.
These are the warriors of our society. We send them overseas to protect our way of life. Police officers, if you do a 30-year career in law enforcement, your average life expectancy is 7 years after retiring.
Wow.
Right? You realize in 2018, more cops and firemen killed themselves than were taken by acts of violence from anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
What the fuck, guys? The reality is this: our toughest people aren't vulnerable.
Yeah.
And if they're not vulnerable, nobody is. Right? So what are we going to do about it?
Well, I think there's a thing like especially for like tough guys, you know, like ourselves, and like especially the police officers, like you said, the military men. There's a thing of you don't want people to worry about you, you know, like you have that image of yourself that you're the man, you're the bread keeper, you know, you're the breadwinner, you know. You want to be the rock in the relationship or the family, and so how do you get people to talk about it? How to not be afraid of, you know, talking? How do you open up those walls?
You know how I smack them upside the head with fucking reality. Reality is, like, we could Google the numbers. I forget what it was off the top of my head. It was like 118 policemen were killed last year. And that's through acts of violence, through bad people, car crashes, stuff that you're like, dude, this is what you face every day. But like 140 something killed themselves because the emotional toll of the job got to them. So how do I get people to be vulnerable? First off, I tell you, this is reality, guys. And it's not going to change. And those stats have been that way since I became a policeman a long time ago.
Right.
What needs to change? We need to talk about that stuff.
We need to talk about that stuff, and we need to change the definition. Like you said, vulnerability is power.
Yeah.
If everybody looked at, vulnerability is power, then all of our powerful warriors and men in society and all these people are going to want to be vulnerable. But because we don't see it like that, I mean, think about even as a little boy in elementary school. Hey, be a big boy, don't cry. You know, like, don't feel these feelings, don't feel these emotions. We're taught to suppress that from a very early age. To don't cry, don't show these feelings, be tough, you know, especially if you're a man. I mean, I think it's 80% of suicides are men.
For sure.
Right? To where it's like men, especially in our society, are trained to put that, and like you said, like fighters, we're trained to not show any weakness, to not show those feelings or emotions like, holy shit, you just kicked the fuck out of me in the stomach, I can't even move, but you're not showing that.
You gotta have that poker face.
So cold, yeah, poker face. And I think that it's very hard unless you have been trained to how to balance that, you know, the in the cage or on the mat mentality, and then balance, you know, off the mat to where you can show that and realize that, okay, off the mat, this is power. Maybe on the mat, it's powerful for me to not show any emotion, but on this side, I have to. So it's talking about it more. It's changing the definition of like, nah, vulnerability doesn't mean you're a bitch or you're weak or you're not tough. Like, vulnerability is power. Like, those are the realest, most powerful people. And one subject I think that's very controversial, let's talk about the President of the United States, you know, Donald Trump. If there's one thing that you can admire about that man, is he is vulnerable. He will say what he thinks. And I'm half Palestinian, half Mexican, so technically I should hate this guy about, you know, trying to build a wall and this about Mexicans, this about Arabs. But if there's one thing I admire about him, I mean, this guy has everything out there. You can't pull anything on him because he is so open, so vulnerable. He'll say what's on his mind. Whether you agree with him or not, he's vulnerable, and obviously it's power. He's the most powerful man in the free world, regardless of what you think of him. I'm not going to get into my political things, but regardless of what you think of that man, there's a perfect example of vulnerability being power.
Yeah. And I think for everybody listening, right, it's easy to draw an analogy of the vulnerability in the cage like Ali did, right? Because the nice thing about that is it's readily apparent to everybody. There's one person that's going to win and there's one that's going to lose. And whoever lost is vulnerable. But all of us face the same circumstances in life. You just don't do it publicly. And the reality is it's easier for you to hide from being vulnerable because nobody else sees it. In the cage, when I lost in front of 5,000 people, including my family, I had to model vulnerability because everybody saw it and wondered what was next. Right? So to me, that's a call to action for everybody is don't hide from the vulnerability just because other people don't see it. You know it's there. and you know what we should be working on in our lives, we got to summons up the courage and put ourselves in circles where it's okay to be vulnerable, and we grow from that. Otherwise, we're cutting ourselves short.
Yeah, and in that cage analogy, it's both fighters are vulnerable, right? Because you're getting in that cage, you're putting yourself at risk of winning or losing, and then afterwards too, the winner or loser, they still have opportunities from there to be vulnerable. Like after a loss, you could not post on social, you could delete your social media, you could not go out, you could choose not to show your face. Or you could continue to be vulnerable, after that, show yourself. And I think it's, again, it's important to not associate vulnerability with weakness or with loss or with anything.
Well, we've seen that in the UFC, We've seen people who weren't able to be vulnerable. Ronda Rousey, for example, it comes off as weakness, her trying to hide herself. The people who were able to be vulnerable and face the media after, and to be able to say what happened, and just put themselves out there like that have been received a lot better, and so I think it's making that movement towards the stigma is kind of burning away, it's starting to look like power now. So I think if we do our part, it's only going to be better. People are going to hear this message, and it's going to. Now the only thing though is when you find yourself being vulnerable and you kind of don't know what to do, what do you think about? Because I have those moments, I haven't been in the cage yet, like you guys. I haven't done any official fights. I've done college rodeo there, and what I do there, I haven't really figured it out. Honestly, I have some trouble when it comes to that performance. How do you keep yourself from being vulnerable? How do you change that energy from kind of feeling sorry for yourself, honestly, to empowering? How do you change that? Because it's not, the stigma is there for a reason, because you feel like crap, when you're vulnerable. Or maybe I'm just not used to being vulnerable. Yeah. Is that what you think it is?
No, I think it's huge. I think, honestly, Alex, you're in a tough spot, man, because you live in a very fake world. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is you are surrounded and inundated by highlight reels day in, day out. Mm-hmm. Like the vast, we talked about this a little bit earlier, right? You got glamorous, pictures of girls in their bikinis, guys with abs, literally all day, every day. You see the best of everything through social media because we're just not being truthful there. Mm-hmm. So I think for you got to realize we all are vulnerable. Yeah. Everybody, right? And it's what we do with it, right? What do we do when we're feeling down? Mm-hmm. Do we hide it and put it in the closet and pretend we're not? And go take a picture next to some car that we don't fucking own and pretend it's ours? Does that make us feel good? Well, that's fake. That doesn't last long. Because as soon as you leave, you realize there's all this stuff over here. And I think the truth is we just got to be okay talking about it. The toughest in our society, the weakest in our society. We've got to come together and realize, let's quit faking it, right? Let's quit pretending everything's okay in our life, because if it's not, let's talk about it. Mm-hmm. So to me, man, I'm simple, guys. It's a fucking choice. Mm-hmm. I choose to be vulnerable, which means I don't have all the answers. I don't know all the questions. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have good days. I'm going to have terrible days. Mm-hmm. But I know where to go in between. Mm-hmm. I know on my good days, I give. Yeah. On my bad days, I have to share energy because I'm going to need somebody to help me out. And it's not weak. It's not, there's a problem with me. We're emotional creatures, but for some reason we got this idea that I'm only supposed to be emotional on all the good stuff, and I hide the bad, and the bad is what kills you. The bad is what causes heart disease and stress, and right? And so let's deal with that. And here's the flip, I believe. The more you involve the bad in your day, the more good you end up having. Mm-hmm. Because you're not hiding it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that all the bad, all the stress, all of that, it does end up killing you if you don't handle it, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't sit with it, if you don't talk about it, right? If you just keep it in the dark, that's what slowly eats away at you. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity. I mean, look at this podcast. Who knows how many people this will reach, and we're in a new era, a new age of the universe, to where 20 years ago we didn't even have cell phones,
right?
And now we have every single day. I mean, I do consider myself a disciplined person, and I'm spending at least an hour a day on social media. I mean, at least, and that is below the average,
for sure.
Very below. I think it's 2 to 3 hours, and I also use a little bit for businesses and stuff too, and try not to. And I'm still posting a lot, but I mean, that's a lot of cumulative time. and we're continuously exposed, even if we're not registering what we're consuming consciously on a conscious level, subconsciously, just like it is training. Like, I mean, we try and train an hour a day.
Yeah.
We're literally consuming an hour a day of media. So like you were saying, we are looking at people's highlight reels. We are doing this, and because of that, many people feel so like that, like they need to have those walls up and only show the good, and not seeing that. No, when you're vulnerable and you show it all, the good and the bad, that you're not only empowering yourself, because you're also empowering others.
For sure.
I mean, the best of the best. We're all. I like the analogy. Recent book trilogy authors Paul Selig. First book is called Book of Freedom, and an analogy in there is that you are not your mind, and you are not your emotions, right? Like emotions and thoughts just come up, and you choose what to focus on and filter, and that's how you can make decisions, right? So we need to realize that every single person, I don't care who you are, Jesus Christ, Gandhi, the Pope, the best people in history have all had fucked up thoughts, have done fucked up things to other people for no reason, have fucked up big, have made huge mistakes, have done something I'm sure that they regret. I'm sure Jesus Christ even, himself did like some fucked up shit. We're all human. And I think that being more vulnerable and sharing those things, like, man, I really messed this up and I want to share this, or I did that, really allows people to connect and be human. Because if you're only showing like, oh, I'm so good at this and I'm so good at that, you can't relate. You can in some instances, but that's not what really what people care about. What really people are insecure about, and what's hurting them are the things that they don't talk about. That's why, like, a platform like this, like being vulnerable, it's like, okay, let's start the conversation. As you guys know, vulnerability thing that I'm sharing is like porn watching habits, right? For me, frankly, I've never thought an issue. I've been watching porn at least once a week minimum since I was like 14 years old. And when you're doing the math on that, that's hours and hours and hours. And that's, that's a pretty conservative. I'm sure it's much higher than that, like being straight up. But nobody talks about that. And it was only like when I started to get a little vulnerable, like, I don't want to talk about like porn. Even with like my bro friend, like guys, it's like, yeah, you'll like talk about porn and bitches and pussy and like all this stuff, but it's not like, you don't really get into it. Like, so how much porn do you watch? And like, how much time are you putting into porn? Like, nobody talks about that. So an example of like that vulnerability is that's a massive issue that not a lot of people talk about. You don't see statuses on social media. Saw this awesome video on Pornhub last night. Check it out. But the average age that a young person comes across porn for the first time, you have a guess?
8. Nowadays?
8 years old.
Is that right?
8 years old, yes. That's right, yeah.
You Googled that.
No, it's just a guess.
to where, like, and I mean, not saying that every 8-year-old is out there, like, looking for porn, but, like, the first time they see something.
Well, I just got that because that's around the age people get phones, So.
Yeah,
nice.
It's crazy. And, I mean, if we're not talking about it, and these kids are seeing this all in the dark, how do they understand sexuality? And, frankly, those are feelings that every single person experiences on a daily basis. Arousal or sexual feelings, and that's something that like nobody is vulnerable about. And it's like, why not, right? We have these constructs around like this taboo. So that's a subject that I'm really interested in, is like exploring sexuality, pornography, things like that, because nobody talks about it. It's like, why not?
Sure.
Well, it's a big part of our life. You see it in advertisements everywhere. Like they use it as a tool. So why aren't we talking about it? And so. And like another thing to add on to the vulnerability thing, I think whenever you're facing that stuff, you got to think about every great story. There hasn't been one that the main character, the hero, hasn't been vulnerable. They haven't had to face something. So struggles come along with the journey, come with the whole package. And so you got to remember, you're like Joe Rogan says, you're the hero in your own story. So you got don't be afraid of facing those things. That's what's stopping you from being great. That's like every great story. Like they don't have the good moment until after they face their vulnerabilities. And so. Take that with a grain of salt, take it as you want it. And
no, it's important, man. Where you come up short is where you're going to grow.
Yeah.
Too many people think they're supposed to have perfect days and are supposed to win all the time. Well, you learn way more in your losses in life than you will winning. So embrace those. Like we got to get past this idea that losing is bad, being vulnerable is bad, coming up short is bad. They're all great things.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's where you grow.
Exactly.
And yeah,
you learn to love that, It's a really amazing thing, and I'm barely getting there. I'm not saying I'm there yet, but I have noticed that I'm starting to get there, and there meaning loving the vulnerability, loving that adversity, like this last competition, like not winning, that little fire under my ass. There's nothing like the taste of unexpected defeat. And if you're not getting defeated every now and then you're not pushing yourself.
Sure.
It's like being a higher level, like a black belt, just beating ass on a bunch of white and blue belts. It's like, all right, dude, like, cool, you're winning, but you're not pushing yourself. Right? And that's everything in life. To where if you're winning every day and it's all like, hell yeah, success, it's like, all right, you need to push yourself because you're obviously not growing if it's all success.
Yeah.
So I think like when you encounter that vulnerability, that struggle, like for me now, I'm realizing sometimes I'm like, fuck yeah, I had a bad day, or like, hell yeah, this customer was randomly racist as fuck to me for no reason. Great growth opportunity, like this is awesome. I'm loving it, and like taking that mentality really, at least in my experience, has been much more effective than like, than just having a negative mentality about it.
So when was the first time you seen like the actual growth from your vulnerability? Because it's easy to see it after that's what happens after, right? If you already know that's part of the process. But like the first time it happened, how did you know, like, or how? I guess when did you first realize that you were actually growing from it?
First realized, man, probably as a really young child. My mother especially was always like, it's gonna be better if you tell the truth. If you lie to me, I'm gonna whoop your ass harder. But like if you tell the truth, you're kind of off the hook, even if you did do something bad. So that was like, all right, like here's what I did from a very young age. So I kind of knew always that was the right thing to do. But of course, like growing up, you conform and in society. Schools and things, you're maybe not as vulnerable, right? I know one thing for me is I grew up in a very affluent neighborhood in Houston, Texas, and my we lived in a smaller apartment, and my friends, like when I would go over to their house, had these just massive multi-million-dollar homes, and I was very self-conscious, especially like in elementary school, just kind of realizing like, oh, like my parents are not rich, and like all the kids I go to school with are rich, So I remember that was definitely something like I would be not vulnerable about at all. And I kind of remember that being a thing, like even when I got like my first girlfriend in middle school, of kind of being like, dang, she can never come over to our house, like we just have this tiny little apartment, and like, her parents are wealthy, like they had this huge mansion, and I was like, so that, I kind of knew, to answer your question, from a very young age, like that's the right thing to do, but I didn't really like understand it's always, in my opinion, it's always the best choice to be vulnerable and truthful. But honestly, a lot of people disagree with that. A lot of people are like, there's times where you shouldn't be vulnerable, and I kind of agree with that, but I'm kind of lately been taking the stance of like, nah, fuck that, like on the cross, basically, like
you put yourself out.
Yeah,
it's interesting. So I think for me, is the opposite. I don't think I realized the importance of vulnerability until probably like the last 4 or 5 years. And I think part of that is just generationally, like growing up, you didn't cry as a boy. Nothing bothered you. You were always stoic. You always pushed through, and you just moved on, and you dealt with it some other day. And I think a lot of that is been to our detriment, and why we're at where we're at in life, and why now, quite honestly, why we have kids that don't lose, right? Everyone wants to bash the millennials and stuff, but a lot of that is a byproduct of my generation not dealing with vulnerability, not dealing with the losses, not dealing with the shortcomings. So because we didn't deal with them, what do we want to do to our kids? Protect them from them. So now they never lose. Now they're never not the best. Everybody gets participation trophies. And the reality is that's just us hiding from what we should have dealt with. So to me, in the best place I've learned to be vulnerable is in my relationships with my kids, and especially my son. I can't tell you how many times we've cried together in the last 3 years. And it's brought us way closer because now he's allowed to experience all the range of emotions that previously we had kind of hidden from each other. because it was what the men are supposed to do. And the reality is what the men were supposed to do was killing us. And it was keeping us distance from the very people we were trying to protect. So I think we're in a good place in society for vulnerability because we're starting to realize that is real. And that's where we go forward. And that's where your relationships are made. Right? Because when you're vulnerable, you get rid of all the people that are hanging around you because you were successful.
Yeah.
Right? They're a dime a dozen. But when you fail, when you let people down, when you don't do what you were supposed to do, when you lose your way, and you wake up in the morning, who's there? Only the people that truly care about you.
Exactly.
But that's who you need. Right? And so for me, this whole journey, I've learned more about myself. I've learned more about the people that are closest to me. And I feel like I'm a much better parent to my kids than I was even earlier in their childhood when I didn't know the importance of addressing this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have a similar experience with my father specifically, that, you know, being tough and don't cry and things like that, to where I very, very recently, probably just in the last year, have been more vulnerable with my father about how I feel towards him and my feelings towards him. And my father was one of those dads who was like never proud. Like to this day, I think he's probably said like, "I'm proud of you," maybe like twice, ever. And it was like, you know, if you get a 4.0, why wasn't a 4.1 kind of thing. And for him, it was very just hard to get deep with anything that had to talk about emotion, because he would kind of deflect and go, you know, tie it back to religion or something that's easy, that's an easy shield or deflection, you know, with the Muslim religion. And barely recently I've been challenging him more, you know, because especially for males, I think that we always want to make dad proud, you know, and be like the strong son and stuff like that. And he comes from a very like masculine macho culture, you know, Palestinian refugee. My grandparents were refugees. He was in Lebanon, and, you know, just did a bunch of like shit and just really like expected dominance and strength in all like your stereotypical like masculine stuff. So it was very hard to ever be like, "Hey, Dad, my feelings are hurt." Like I would have never said that shit ever about anything. And now that I'm older, and now that I've decided to be like, you know, let's be real.
Yeah.
It's changed the whole concept and has allowed us to get closer, even though sometimes he may not say it. Like you can just kind of feel it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're removing that wall. Right? You're knocking down some of those walls. And I think there's a very important distinction between being vulnerable and being a victim.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Sure. And to me, it comes down to two things. When I'm vulnerable, I'm taking ownership and seeking self-improvement. Whatever happened, whether I was in charge of it happening or was there circumstances, I own whatever took place. Now I will fix it. A victim displaces all the blame. Right? It's usually the same circumstances. Oh, life gave me this. This happened. Vulnerability means I look at this, I process it, I talk about it, I share, I go to whoever I need to for help on it, but I know I am ultimately responsible for moving past whatever took place. As a victim, a lot of times I insulate myself and it's not my fault, I wasn't responsible, look at me, I'm the victim. And I think that's an important distinction to draw in this discussion, is being vulnerable is accountable. Being a victim means shit just happens to you and it's beyond your control. And I'm never in that realm. Like I know whatever happens in life, somehow I got to fix it. Or it wouldn't happen to you. And I think if we look at things like that, right? Okay, why is this obstacle here for me? It's for me to grow. It's for me to challenge, get out of my comfort zone. If there's a smooth path, everybody would try to do what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. I'm really glad you're bringing that up because I feel a lot of people can misconstrue the definition of vulnerability again and take it as like, oh, well, let me just be a victim, right? And then post like, oh, I'm feeling so sad. I got this and this and this. That's not being vulnerable.
Nobody wants that.
Nobody
that
cares.
Is fucking whining.
Like that. Yeah, that's whining and complaining. I think that's a very important distinction to make.
Yeah, and I don't want people to sit back and be like, oh, I'm going to be vulnerable and I'm just going to go tell Ali all my problems. Right. That's not that's just dumping, right? Vulnerability is this, right? Like, I struggled with this and I hear his story and I piece together what he learned from his story and I can apply it to my story. Right? Vulnerability is sharing and giving and being there for somebody and then going to somebody when you need them. Right. But it's not a dump truck of emotions where you just kick them off and it's somebody else's job to fix you. Right. And I think that's a big distinction. Like, you are responsible for this. Mm-hmm. Being vulnerable means that you're open, you're sharing, and you're going to move forward from it. You're no longer stuck where you were.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think would be something that we can challenge or recommend for our listeners to do that's a way of like practicing vulnerability?
I think it's easy. To me, it's easy. Like, I guarantee right now, all three of us, off the top of our heads, can pick up one thing in our past, in our mind, that we know we should have dealt with that we've just pushed off for years. I almost guarantee it. Yeah. And so can everybody listening. So write it down and figure out what do we need to do to move past it.
I think it's great, man.
Right? It's literally, to me, it's that easy. And it's crazy to me, right? Like, and I'm not against anything or for anything, but I am just huge in that I am responsible for me, my happiness, and what I bring to the world. I don't necessarily need to pay $1,000 an hour for somebody to tell me. Like, I know what I'm hiding from. I know what I've faced, and I know where I want to get. So literally, what is that thing you've been backpacking? Like, we talked about this before, like kind of that analogy. If you think of your life and it's a backpacking expedition, what's in your backpack? Is it happiness, joy, food for the thoughts to sustain you and to fuel you? Or is it all the burdens of the stuff you left unresolved? Is it all the past failures that just sit on your mind? Is it all that negative self-talk? Your backpack's full. It's going to weigh the same. Is it stuff that's moving you forward, or is it stuff weighing you down? Mm-hmm. And let's start moving towards vulnerability. Let's start moving towards self-improvement by pulling something out that's weighing us down and putting it on the table.
Mm-hmm. Do you think taking responsibility is a good first step for that? You know, like taking responsibility for actually how you feel and for things that aren't really working out the way you want it to. You know?
Yeah, I think that's a step, and I think being honest, right? Mm-hmm. Look in the mirror and realize the only person that's going to produce the life you want to have is you. Period. Mm-hmm. Everybody else can want good things in your life. Like, I want success for everybody, for all of you guys. Yeah. But the reality is, I'm not going to work for your success. Mm-hmm. You got to work for it.
Exactly.
And how do we get there? By admitting where we got to make improvements. That requires vulnerability. Mm-hmm. Right? I think, so for me, that's it, man. Look, whatever you've been carrying around that you know you should have dealt with, throw it on the table. Write it down. Bullet point out some things you need to do to fix this, and let's move forward.
And then what? Tell someone, post it on social media, right? Because once you write it down, it has to be seen, right? Mm-hmm. You have to
some form of accountability,
somewhere. Right?
Yeah, to be able to hold yourself accountable, or have someone else hold you accountable. You know, just to, if anything else, just to see that you made the effort. You know.
Yeah.
Maybe a social media post. Maybe a text to a family member. I'm not sure. Well, what do you suggest?
I mean, I think is any of that.
Yeah.
But I think just putting it where somebody else is like, hey, dude, you said you were going to work on this. Mm-hmm. Where are we at? Mm-hmm. And then here's the other thing. Don't go to the same people you've been going to for years that feel bad for you, that whine with you, complain with you, because they're not helping you.
They're enablers.
Right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like, if you're like, hey, I've already been doing this, it's not getting better. Look at your circle. Mm-hmm. If you're already trying to be vulnerable, mm-hmm. but it's around the same group that as soon as I tell you my problems, you tell me your problems, and you say your problems, and nobody has a solution for anything, you're not in a group that's improving. You're in a group that's just complaining.
Yeah, you got a weird feedback loop of just complaining.
But that's easy, right? Like, we can all think of that group. We sit around, we bitch and complain, and like 2 hours later, you don't feel any better about it. You're like, dude, that was 2 hours. Oh my gosh. You might be like, oh, at least my life's not as bad as Alex.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, I don't have this. But the reality is we didn't solve a problem.
And you go back to doing the exact same thing as you've been doing before.
You haven't changed your behaviors. You're not going to get a different result. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things. One, write it down. Two, put it in a group of people that are going to hold you accountable to solving it.
Yeah. Or send it to us, right? I was kind of saying that'd be cool if we get some of our listeners some action items, and on the next thing we read some of them, like, hey, so-and-so
give some advice.
Wrote down this one thing and shared it with a family member. Let's talk about this situation and maybe how we can grow from this specific listener situation. So I think that's a great idea. You know, writing one thing down that you've been putting off.
And we all know what it is.
Yeah.
Everybody knows what it is.
Everyone has something, you know. For me, too, I really use social media as a tool.
Yes.
Vulnerability is the practice, too, of just being genuine, 100% authentic, right? You're just being real. So, and you can only be real right now, in that moment, right? Like, all we have is right now. The past, the future, like this present moment. So you may regret it later, right? Or you may judge it later, but in that moment. So I really like the use of stories. They're going to be gone in 24 hours, but it can be a really good practice of like, this is what's going on. I'm being vulnerable. I'm being real right here, and then just hitting post.
Right.
So it's been a big practice for me of putting stuff out there and, you know, not really expecting anything, which are not doing it for likes or for people to message me. But practicing that I have found to be a really useful tool, because that is putting yourself out there. You're putting yourself where people that you're connected to, your connections are going to see what you want to share. So expressing yourself, I think, is very important, of just practicing expression.
Yeah, and on top of that, you know, being vulnerable is a journey, and when you put yourself out there, people are going to respond maybe not exactly how you expected, and you can't get down on yourself for people who aren't willing to be vulnerable themselves. And so there's plenty of people out there that aren't really vulnerable. I know my family's like that, you know. I come from a really conservative background. We're a bunch of cowboys, you know. Family's been ranchers for generations. So, you know, some of the stuff that I talk about with them, it's just a whole different world for them, so they might not understand. So you got to be willing to know that your growth isn't their growth, and that you don't attach yourself to the people, you know. You're your own person. You're going to have your own vulnerabilities, you know, and how people respond to them isn't a gauge of your growth, really, you know. Just because someone like doesn't really respond to it as well doesn't mean that you're not doing the right thing. So just had to put that out there.
Yeah, amen. I mean, look at Trump. People love him, people hate him.
Yeah,
but he's one vulnerable person, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that goes kind of what Ali was saying is, you know, on your social media, like, that's a great place to look at how authentic are you. Mm-hmm. Does every picture have to have 8 filters?
Right.
Or is it really you? You know, is the stuff in your pictures really you, or is that you pretending to be somebody else? And reach out to us, and we'll come up with some way to get in touch with us. But share what it is you're gonna take out of that backpack that's been weighing you down, and how are we gonna move forward with it? And nobody else. And this is a big thing for me, and it's kind of interesting to say, but it's just the truth, is nobody else can want your success more than you want your success. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, it's just not going to work. Like, I've never seen anybody get to where they want in life by Ali willing me to be successful. It just doesn't happen. I have to be willing to do that work, and part of it is lightening my load, man, and moving forward. And whatever you're carrying in that backpack that's weighing you down, it's really weighing you down because it's meant to teach you a lesson. But you can only learn a lesson when you face it. Otherwise, you're just hiding from it. It's a weight. It's a burden. And we got to move past that. And I think this is a great time for us to pull one thing out of that backpack and examine it, and then see, okay, what did I learn from this? And you'll be amazed at how much lighter you're going to feel on the backside, because now it's not there.
Yeah, that's true, man. And you got to decide at the end of the day, like you said, what do you want to carry with you? You know, like, are you going to carry all that stuff, all that extra stuff that's really making you feel like shit at the end of the day, you know? Or are you going to take stuff that's helping you push forward, growing, and
Yeah, I mean, look at the analogy, right? It's your backpack. In my backpack, if I gotta go hike across the desert, do I want water and food and sunscreen and shelter, or do I want fucking bad memories and anger and resentment and hatefulness and right? What is gonna weigh the same?
It's like carrying cinder blocks in there.
One's fueling you and one's weighing you down. But either way, you're walking, and life is a march, right? Life is a walk. What do I walk with every day? Mm-hmm. Fuel for my soul or burdens?
Trying to be lean.
Yeah, let's do it up. So let's move forward on that. Let's pull one thing out of that backpack that's weighing you down. Let's address it and let's move forward, man, because that's the only way we grow.
Amen.
Amen, man. Yeah, well, I'll give an email out for those people who want to reach out. It's arangel@alex@gmail.com. I'll spell it out for you guys. arangel.alex@gmail.com. So
that'd be cool. Yeah, we'll get a fancy name going, but right now, man, we just wanted to get this out to you, kind of share that story on vulnerability and some action steps, and then really we'd love for you guys to tell us what you're feeling from the podcast, and maybe the name will come organically from you guys. The reality is this: we are all responsible for where we want to go, how we're going to get there, and what we're going to achieve. The beauty of life is it's better to do it with other people involved. And when you start to look to what can I give to everybody else, you're going to find that life is plentiful. And there's much more of it than what can I take from people.
Exactly, man. Like for me, if I didn't take that step to be vulnerable to go to Trial Doom, I wouldn't have met you guys, right? And we wouldn't be here right now, and I wouldn't have those few episodes that I had on my own podcast. So putting yourself out there is just kind of a testament to that. When you be vulnerable, you allow yourself, great things happen, especially when you put yourself around great people. So definitely be looking forward to that growth. Keep it in mind when you're being vulnerable. It's not all about the bad stuff. There's good stuff come from it. So.
Agreed. Yeah, it's been an awesome one. I'm looking forward to what we build from this, and I appreciate the vulnerability that caused this. So thank you.
Sure.
Guys.
Yeah, and I want you guys to realize whatever you're putting out in the world is what you're going to attract. So if you're building up walls and negativity and you feel out of control of what life's giving you, you're pulling in the same people with the same thought process. On the flip side, if you see the world as opportunities and growth and potential, you're going to attract those same kind of people looking for that in life. So remember, you're responsible for the energy you bring to anything. And part of that is realizing that the good and the bad in our life are both teaching us lessons. We can't only want to learn from the good. So let's look at some of the stuff that maybe we didn't like. Pull something out of that backpack and really let's move forward. And next time we're together, that same issue is resolved and we're moving forward. Or we're at least in the process of resolving it. Cool?
Well, this is Alex, Jerrod, and Ollie, and we're signing out, guys. See ya.